Hey guys, Lunch Money Comics here. Another early morning, another flea market. This time I'm at Grafton Flea Market, right in the middle of Massachusetts. And I've never been here before, so let's go hunting for comics.
You know what? And how did we
7 o'clock. So what he was gonna come here and set up and let the kids run.
Star Wars?
A whole bunch in a row. There's 5 in a row, and then they, serious, I'll open one. You want the bag?
Mama, she's got to think about it. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning.
Hey. Lots of Virginia. Bummer. Detached cover. It's the first full killer croc, I think. In really bad shape, but I might be able to fix it up. All right, guys, so that flea market didn't have that many comic books. I was able to find one that is definitely worth buying and worth talking about despite its horrendous condition. Yeah, I guess I'll see you at home. So there you go, guys. That was Grafton Flea Market in Grafton, Massachusetts. It's located right in the middle of the state, so it's pretty accessible from almost anywhere in New England. It's also one of those flea markets that's open from the spring all the way through December, so it's great to have an option for a flea market even when the weather starts to turn pretty cold. I'll make sure to put a link down in the description to its website so that if you're in the area, you can check it out yourself. So the main point of this video is, of course, hunting for comic books at that flea market. I did buy 3 comic books that I can't wait to share with you. But sort of the bigger thing I want to talk about is the condition of comic books I find at flea markets. There's no surprises here. They're usually in bad shape. I mean, that's sort of par for the course when you're digging for comic books at yard sales in flea markets. But the big thing I want to talk about is specifically how vendors rarely take into consideration the condition of their books when they're pricing them. I have lots of horror stories of people trying to sell really bad books at really high prices, and that sort of happened to me at this flea market, with the one exception of a comic book that I'm pretty happy to walk away with. It's in terrible condition, but I didn't overpay. I can't wait to show you. In the meantime, though, before I get to that, I have something a little bit different. This just showed up at my door. So this is a comic book that I ordered. Despite the fact that I get most of my, collection from flea markets and yard sales, I do have to buy lots of books the old-fashioned way at comic book stores and, of course, like eBay and other online vendors. So that's exactly what this is. And I figured since it just showed up in the mail and I was already going to film anyways, maybe you guys would be interested. So let's see what we got. So this comic book here I think will be familiar to a lot of people. It features a character that had their own Disney Plus show this year. And, so this book was actually pretty hot. While the hype was kind of going on, this book kind of jumped up in value. I wanted this book, but I figured, I could totally wait till the hype died down and get it at a cheap price, which is exactly what I did. And that's exactly what the market did. So this book here is having a little bit of a correction from its Disney Plus hype. But what's kind of cool about it, I just wanted like a high, quality version of it, high condition version of it. And, I was kind of doing the math in my head. I was like, okay, it would cost this much money to, buy this book in a high grade. And then if I wanted to get it graded, I have to pay to get it graded plus shipping. And I'd probably have to pay to get it, cleaned and pressed perhaps before I sent it out. So I was kind of doing the math. And if I actually wanted like a high grade book of this, it probably would have cost me, quite a bit of money. And then I saw this book on eBay and I kind of threw a low bid at it last second and I got it and ended up getting a graded book for substantially less than it would have cost me to actually buy a high grade book and send it in myself. So the book that I'm talking about here is, no surprise to anybody, maybe you've caught on already. Let me know in the comments if you've guessed which one it is. This book here is Moon Knight #1. So this is a graded 9.4. This is from 1980. This is his first full ongoing series. It's the really cool cover by Bill Sienkiewicz, who's an artist that I like a lot. It's really neat. It's got you see Moon Knight sort of looming over his 3 main personalities down there. And it's the first appearance of Khonshu, his god of the moon, that he's the avatar of. It's also the first appearance of Bushman, who's like a major villain of his. So I think this is a pretty cool book to have. I mean, of all the Moon Knight books to sort of collect, obviously his first appearance in Werewolf by Night, that's a big one. But he has that other book, that 1976 book, the Marvel Spotlight there, 28. That is, that's his first main solo story. And where you first are introduced to his different personalities. But this one in 1980 is pretty cool. It's actually most of his origin story actually happens in this book here. So I'm happy to have it. I really like Moon Knight, and despite what people thought of the Disney Plus show, I mean, Oscar Isaac was great. He's a great actor, and Moon Knight's staying around. There's no doubt about it. Whether it's a second season or he's going to appear, in a movie, which I think is inevitable. I think these books are going to go back up. I'm going to talk really quickly about slab books. I don't want to get into a whole discussion. I'm actually not a big fan of slab books. Long story short, I feel like once you put it in encapsulated in plastic, it's no longer a comic book. It's a poster. But that's okay. I kind of call it, I think it's okay for the 3 Ps, right? Preservation, especially older books. Price, you can kind of stabilize the price, what the census is and what the condition is. It's easy to come up with a price. And finally, presentation, picture or poster, pick your P there, how it looks. And books I think that are like this, that have a great cover, that's also significant and has a character on the front. I think it's okay to own these books, as slabs, every once in a while. Oh, so I haven't discussed how much I actually paid for this. So I ended up getting this for $80. I was looking at high grade copies of Moon Knight 1 and it was like, 40 or 50 bucks. And like I said, if you send it to CGC plus shipping plus all, the fees, you're pretty close to like 35 bucks a book. So, never mind the fact that, I might need to get it cleaned and pressed first. And, and then even then, there's no guarantee I would have got like a 9.4. So I'm pretty happy. I think I got a pretty good deal at $80 for this book. But definitely let me know, guys, down in the comments if you think this is a good purchase for that price. I like it. I'm happy to have it in my collection. It presents great, and I'm going to put it on my wall right now. All right, there we go. I think you can see it over my shoulder. So back to business at hand. The Grafton Flea Market. Yeah, it's sort of a strange flea market. I mean, I find like a lot of markets have sort of like a theme where they gravitate towards one type of thing. So sometimes they're like really old antique flea markets. They have lots of old furniture and things like that. Sometimes they're more new stuff, lots of wholesale type things. This was a pretty good mix of everything. They had a small indoor space for like, permanent setups. Outside they had, lots of vendors selling just, like kitschy stuff that you would find again at like, a superstore or something like that. And then you had like really old antiques, and you had other people that just like looked like they just, cleaned out a garage or a storage unit, and they just had just random stuff everywhere. So it's, no surprise that I had a really hard time finding comic books. They were sprinkled everywhere. I found like, 2 or 3 like all over the place. But there were only 2 or 3 vendors that actually had like a box of comic books. So the first one that I found was actually pretty close to the entrance. They had lots of comic books. They were lots of, JLA stuff. They had lots of, Black Panther was in there. But it was mostly modern stuff. But I was still able to come away with 2 books that I quite like. They were 2 for $5. So these next 2, $5 total. First up is Alpha Flight number 5. This one's from 1983. Really cool cover by John Byrne of the character Puck, sort of doing all his, crazy tumbling and gymnastics. I just thought this cover was really cool, really unique. I like the character of Puck. I like Alpha Flight. And I just liked, like this like lemon yellow cover. It's a unique looking book. So I thought it was really cool. I didn't have it in my collection. Happy to add it. The other book I got was this, The New Teen Titans. This is also from 1983. You'll notice there is no issue number, and that's because this is a special printing. This is an anti-drug campaign. It says right here, the President's Drug Awareness Campaign. That would be President Reagan, in cooperation with IBM, the computer company. And this is something they would have handed out like in schools, in the early 80s, to try to dissuade kids from using drugs. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, I distinctly remember, all these big anti-drug pushes in my schools. And I always find comic books like this sort of really interesting. It's not main, continuity or things that we're used to in comic books, but I like the fact that people use comic books as a medium to reach out to kids, especially here, this is for a really good cause. What sort of shocked me about this, though, when I was looking through it, there is some pretty overt drug use in this book. And, really bad things happen to the people that are using drugs in this book. And it's quite scary. And I think, that was by design. They were using this to try to, scare kids straight. And yeah, looking at the images in this, I'm not entirely sure, even in this day and age, if they'd let some of this fly in a comic book. It's pretty crazy. But I thought this book was a really interesting piece of history. You get the whole Teen Titans there on the cover. It's pretty cool. I'm happy to have this. It's not something you see every day. So something kind of odd happened to me while I was at this flea market. You saw in the footage me going through these boxes that had lots of like, Red Sonja in there, and they were all nicely bagged and boarded, but there was nothing I really wanted. But what you didn't see was, before I walked over to those comic books, there was a guy picking through them. And I sort of just, casually said like, hey man, is there anything good in there? And he looked up at me and he did like a double take and he said, hey, I know you from that new YouTube channel. Which was weird. I haven't been recognized yet. My channel's not that old. And yeah, he was another comic book picker from, Massachusetts. He lived on the North Shore where I grew up. And he picks a lot like at, flea markets in southern New Hampshire and eastern Massachusetts. So we chatted for a bit. He gave me some great tips for flea markets to check out, which I definitely will. So shout out to Joshua from Andover. It was great meeting you. Thank you for the tips. And definitely thank you for watching. All right, which brings us to sort of our main attraction. Right near where these other Red Sonja comic books were, there was a guy that had just like everything. It looked like he had cleaned out like a storage locker. I mean, there was no rhyme or reason to the stuff he had. It was just tons of stuff everywhere. And there was a blue plastic container sitting on a table. And I looked in there and there was lots of like magazines, newspapers, those types of things. I think even a couple like instruction manuals. But mixed in were a whole bunch of comic books. Now, in the footage you saw me find a couple of really interesting ones. One was Power Rangers #1. Now, this comic book can go for some pretty good money in good condition. And you saw in the footage, though, when I reached in and went to pull it out, the entire front and back cover were completely detached. Not even like detached at the staple, like they were ripped down the spine in 2 different pieces, not attached to the book. Bummer. A little bit later on, I found a Freak Brothers, which are books, you know, it's an indie book that people find very collectible. I've actually found a couple before, and they can actually be worth quite a bit of money. It seemed like good shape, but, you know, it was sort of sealed in this bag. And then I grabbed one more comic book I'll talk about. So here's the interesting part. You know, I had a couple of books that I put aside, and I asked him how much they were. He said if they're not in a bag, they're $2 each. But if they do have a bag, they probably have a price on the back. So I looked at the Power Rangers one, and it said like $20. And I pointed out like, hey, you know, like the cover's not even attached. He's like, well, I could probably do 10. Okay, it's not worth that. So then I went to the Freak Brothers, and the Freak Brothers, you know, was actually in decent condition, but I hadn't opened it up. I hadn't looked at it, and there's lots of editions. So I flipped it over, and on the back it said $45. So I think that's a little aggressive, and I said, hey man, I think this is kind of high. He's like, well, I looked it up. I'm like, okay, well, what's the best you could do? And he said, $20. I said, okay, maybe, but I have to open it up and look at it. And when I flipped it over to, you know, take it out of the bag, the price tag was actually like the tape that held the bag shut. So I said, hey man, is it okay if I rip this to get into it, you know, look at it? And he just gave me like a dirty look, which I took as a no. So never mind, I put that one down. So I finally did walk away with one comic book. It wasn't in a bag, so it was only $2. And you saw it in the footage. It's this one here, Detective Comics number 524 from 1983. The significance of this is that it's the first full appearance of Killer Croc. Now, evidently Killer Croc appeared in, you know, a couple of cameos before this, but he's always like a generic gangster in like a trench coat and a fedora. You never see his face. So this comic book, he actually like pulls his collar down and reveals that he has like reptilian features. So a pretty cool comic book, honestly, you know, and actually can go for a good amount of money if it's in good shape. This one is not, though. Besides all the color breaking creases that are all over it, the biggest flaw is, of course, this bottom corner, which is completely missing. The opposite side on the back cover is also missing a little bit of the corner. You know, I was able to flatten out all these pages, which I think you saw in the footage were all sort of crumpled up. I was able to flatten this out. It presents, you know, much nicer in a poly bag. But I mean, there's condition issues here that there's no fixing whatsoever. You know, the spine is a mess. Again, this whole thing's missing. But it was $2, so I'm happy that, you know, despite the condition of this book, you know, he wasn't asking like an egregious price for it. I would have also walked away. I think it's worth $2 just to have in my collection. I'm kind of disappointed it wasn't worth more. But I think the biggest thing I want to impress upon you guys is that, you know, I bump into this stuff all the time when I'm looking at flea markets. You know, I find crummy comic books. I expect them to be in bag edition, but you also sort of expect to pay low prices for them. Granted, I do find, you know, decent comic books for cheap, but far more often, these comic books are absolutely trashed. And it's very common for me to bump into vendors who just don't understand that condition should affect the prices. And this guy, you know, he had this huge bin of comic books, and none of them were in good shape. He just looked them up on the internet, and that was the price he stuck with. And, you know, I have so many horror stories from just this summer of similar situations. People who saw my Brimfield, you know, a video a few weeks ago, saw like there were these boxes that were just saturated with water. They were just like left out in the rain. You couldn't even look at them. They were so wet. And even the ones that weren't that wet, the ones that were in bags, they were still pretty damp, and they were just extremely overpriced, and the vendor wouldn't budge. You know, we had another one. It was Ghost Rider 28, the first appearance of the Midnight Suns and Lilith, which a pretty good comic book. And it usually goes for like $25, $30. Had a price tag of $14. Hey, that's pretty good. Except, you know, it wasn't in a poly bag. It was loose, and it was ripped laterally from like the edge of the cover all the way to the spine. And that $14 price tag was stuck on the book. No poly bag, stuck to the front cover. I mean, guys, I could go on and on about these horror stories. It'll just make me sad. It'll make me upset. But let me know down in the comments if you guys have bumped into this, where you have vendors who don't understand that condition is everything with comic books. Let me know down in the comments if you have similar stories. It'll make me feel better about some of mine. But at least I got this book, despite its condition, for a low price. And despite its condition, I am still happy to have it. So there you go, guys. You know, if you like this sort of stuff, go down and hit that like button. And, you know, definitely leave me a comment. I love reading through all of them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing so. I try to put out content every single week, so hit that bell button and you'll be notified every single time I post a new video. I did pretty good at the flea market. I spent a grand total of $7. So I definitely didn't break the bank, but I'm happy with all my purchases. So let me know what you think of these purchases here. Also, let me know what you think of that Moon Knight #1. Do you think that was a good deal for $80? In the meantime, guys, keep hitting those flea markets. I hope you find comic books in strange and unusual places too, at good prices. And until next time, thanks for watching.